The veteran went out to inspect the land after the storm and looked up at the tree. What hung there was neither beast nor legend. He cut the rope, unaware of who was watching from the forest. Subscribe and write in the comments where you are watching from. The valley lay open and quiet beneath a pale Wyoming sky, the kind of sky that never promised comfort and never threatened it either. It simply existed, wide and indifferent, stretching over low ridges and scattered pine like an unblinking witness. Cold lived here year-round, settling into the soil, into the stones, into the bones of those who stayed too long. Even in late autumn, when other places still clung to warmth, the mornings in Red Valley arrived brittle and sharp, carrying the smell of frost and dry grass and distant water. The creek cut through the land like a narrow scar, limestone banks pale against the dark earth. It never froze completely, no matter how hard the winter pressed down. Water whispered through it even in January, sliding under thin skins of ice, moving with a persistence that felt almost stubborn. Some mornings, when the light was just right, steam rose from its surface like breath from a living thing. The man who walked its edge each morning knew that creek better than any road. He moved slowly, boots worn smooth at the heel, each step measured and deliberate. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 46 years old, though the lines in his face suggested a longer life. His shoulders carried a slight forward curve, not from age, but from years of bracing himself against sounds and memories that arrived without warning. His hair had gone prematurely gray at the temples, cropped short out of habit rather than style. A faded jacket hung loose over a flannel shirt, both chosen for warmth and utility, not comfort. Ethan lived alone in the house his father had built decades earlier, when this valley had still been something people talked about leaving rather than forgetting. The house stood at the edge of the trees, its wood weathered to a dull gray, its porch sagging just enough to creak beneath careful steps. Inside, the rooms were clean but sparse. Furniture remained where it had always been, but decoration had quietly vanished over the years. Photographs sat face down in a drawer. A pair of old dog tags lay wrapped in cloth at the back of a cabinet, untouched. He had returned from the war 13 years earlier, but some part of him had never fully crossed the distance back. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sudden jolt of his own breath catching, his heart racing as if it were trying to outrun something invisible. Loud noises pulled him sharply out of the present. Even the slam of a truck door down the road could make his hands tighten before he realized where he was. So he built routines. Routines were anchors. He woke before sunrise, brewed strong coffee, ate the same plain breakfast, and walked the land. He checked fence lines, though nothing had tested them in years. He followed the creek path because its steady sound grounded him. Water moved forward. Water didn't remember. That morning began like all the others. The air cut clean against his face as he stepped outside, breath clouding faintly. The valley was still, save for the whisper of wind moving through tall grass and the distant knock of branches touching. Ethan noticed the aftermath of the night immediately. The storm had come through hard and fast, rattling the house with sudden gusts, shaking loose stones along the higher slopes. He had felt it even through sleep, his body waking before his mind, tension coiling tight in his chest until the wind passed. Along the creek, the land showed signs of disruption. Broken branches lay scattered where none had fallen before. A young pine leaned at an awkward angle, roots partially exposed. The ground near the water was churned in places, as if something heavy had lost its footing. Ethan slowed, scanning the area with a practiced eye. This was not the work of deer or elk. The impressions were wrong, too deep in some places, too broad in others. He crouched and pressed his gloved fingers into one of the marks. The earth was compacted hard beneath the surface. Whatever had passed through here carried weight and urgency. Then he saw the length of material caught against a rock at the creek's edge. Synthetic rope, industrial grade. It did not belong here. He lifted it carefully, turning it over in his hands. The fibers were frayed in places, stretched as if they had been pulled under strain. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his stomach, the quiet internal signal that told him something had gone wrong before anyone noticed. He followed the direction of the disturbed ground, moving upstream, eyes tracking every detail. The path led toward a stand of older trees, cottonwood and pine tangled together where the land sloped upward. The wind moved strangely there, caught and redirected by the trunks, producing a low, hollow sound. Ethan stepped into the shade and stopped. At first, his mind refused to assign meaning to what he was seeing. A dark shape hung suspended above the creek, partially obscured by branches. It swayed slightly, not with the wind, but with uneven, panicked motion. His breath stalled. His heart hammered once, hard enough that he felt it in his throat. He took another step, then another, until the shape resolved into something impossible. A small figure hung from a thick branch several feet above the ground, caught in a loop of rope that had tightened around its upper torso. Its legs stretched downward, toes brushing against the rough bark of the tree, scraping uselessly for purchase. Dark hair covered its body in uneven patterns, matted and damp. Its chest heaved in shallow, frantic pulls, each breath a struggle. It was not a man. It was not any animal Ethan had ever known. The realization arrived slowly, unfolding piece by piece as his eyes traced the shape of the limbs, the proportions just wrong enough to defy explanation. The arms were long, but not fully grown. The hands wide, fingers curling instinctively around nothing. The face was partially hidden by hair, but the eyes were unmistakably alive, wide and dark with fear. A juvenile, a child. The rope was not a noose. Ethan saw that immediately. It was a capture loop, the kind used to restrain large animals temporarily. Someone had thrown it over the branch and cinched it tight, likely intending to immobilize whatever they had caught until transport arrived. Panic had done the rest. Weight and movement had pulled the loop upward, lifting the smaller body off the ground. Below, the earth bore the story clearly. Massive footprints surrounded the tree, pressed deep into the soil. Bark had been ripped away. Branches were snapped clean, scattered like broken bones. Whatever had happened here had ended abruptly. The adults had been forced away, driven off by something louder, more threatening than teeth and muscle. Humans. Ethan did not think. Thinking came later. His body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had taken over years earlier, in places where hesitation meant death. He dropped his pack and moved toward the tree, testing the trunk with one hand before pulling himself upward. The bark scraped against his palms, biting cold into his skin through the gloves. The branch creaked under his weight, but held. The small figure struggled weakly as he approached, a soft, choked sound escaping its throat. Ethan reached the rope and drew his knife without ceremony. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. He had cut straps like this before, had felt this same resistance under the blade, had known what it meant to be too slow. The rope parted with a sharp snap. The weight dropped suddenly into his arms, heavier than he expected, solid and warm and trembling. They fell together, Ethan absorbing the impact as he hit the ground, rolling instinctively to protect what he held. The creature gasped, sucking air into lungs that had been denied it for too long, its body shuddering uncontrollably. Ethan stayed still, breathing slow, one arm braced around the small, fur-covered back. He felt the rapid beat beneath his hand, felt the warmth that confirmed life. He did not speak. Words would only add confusion. He waited until the shaking eased, just slightly, until the frantic movement became uneven, but real breathing. Only then did he look fully at what he had saved. The juvenile Bigfoot lay against his chest, eyes half lidded with exhaustion, chest rising and falling in ragged rhythm. It was young, far from full-grown, its features softer, less defined. Not a monster, not a myth, just a living being that had been caught between forces it did not understand. Ethan slowly eased himself upright, scanning the woods. Silence pressed in again, heavy and watchful. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that leaving the creature here was not an option. Neither was calling for help. Help, in this case, would arrive wearing uniforms and carrying equipment meant for containment, not mercy. He shifted his grip, careful not to restrain more than necessary, and rose to his feet. The juvenile did not resist. It clung weakly, fingers tightening in his jacket, as if instinctively seeking stability. Ethan turned toward his home, the creek whispering behind him, and took his first step back along the path. He did not know what would come next. He only knew that for the first time in years, his routine had been broken by something that required him to choose action over avoidance. The valley remained quiet as he walked, the sky unchanged, the wind indifferent. But something fundamental had shifted beneath that stillness, and as Ethan carried the small, breathing weight through the cold morning air, he understood that whatever this moment was, it would not pass without consequence. Ethan did not remember the walk back to the house in clear pieces. Later, when he tried to retrace the path in his mind, the memory came to him as a blur of motion and sound and weight. The creek faded behind him, its steady whisper swallowed by the dull rush in his ears. His boots found the familiar ground by instinct alone, navigating roots and stones without conscious thought. Every part of him was focused on the living body pressed against his chest, on the uneven rise and fall beneath his arm, on the fragile fact that the creature was still breathing. By the time the house came into view, his muscles ached with a quiet, spreading strain. The juvenile had stopped trembling quite so violently, but it remained tense, its long fingers curled tight in the fabric of Ethan's jacket, as though letting go would mean falling again. Ethan slowed as he approached the clearing, scanning the tree line one more time. Nothing moved. No sound followed him. Still, the sense of being observed clung to him, faint but persistent, like pressure against the back of his neck. He did not take the creature inside the house. That decision came to him fully formed, without debate. The house was his refuge, his controlled space, narrow and predictable. This was something else, something wild, however young. He crossed instead to the old shed, set a short distance from the main structure, half hidden by pines. It had once been used for tools and spare lumber, but now stood mostly empty, its door hanging slightly crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the air smelled of dust and dry wood. Light filtered through gaps in the boards, thin and pale. Ethan eased the juvenile down onto a folded tarp near the back wall, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible, his motions deliberate. The creature watched him closely, head tilted, eyes dark and alert despite exhaustion. It did not attempt to flee. It did not lash out. It simply stayed where it was placed, chest still heaving, throat working painfully with each breath. Ethan crouched a few feet away and waited. Minutes passed. The wind slipped through the trees outside, rattling the loose boards of the shed. Somewhere farther off, a bird called, then fell silent. The juvenile shifted once, adjusting its weight, then stilled again. Its breathing gradually steadied, the frantic gasps smoothing into slower, deeper pulls of air. Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Only then did he allow himself to truly observe. The creature's fur was thick but uneven, darker along the back and shoulders, lighter along the chest and face. Its limbs were long, but lacked the full strength of adulthood. The skin beneath the hair bore faint marks, old scrapes, and healed abrasions, the quiet record of a life lived outdoors. There was no sign of recent violence beyond the raw indentation where the rope had pressed. The fur there flattened and darkened. Ethan fetched water from the house and returned, setting the bowl on the ground between them. He did not push it closer. He simply placed it and leaned back against the wall, giving space. The juvenile watched the bowl, nostrils flaring slightly as it caught the scent. After a long moment, it leaned forward and drank, carefully at first, then with more confidence. Water dripped from its chin onto the tarp. Something loosened inside Ethan's chest at the sight. The first day passed slowly. Ethan remained nearby, working quietly at small tasks, repairing a loose hinge, sorting old tools, all while keeping the juvenile within his peripheral vision. He avoided sudden movements. When he needed to leave the shed, he did so calmly, announcing his presence with soft sounds rather than words. The creature tracked him with its gaze but did not follow. As evening approached, the temperature dropped sharply. Ethan brought blankets, thick and worn, and laid them near the juvenile without touching it. He left food as well. Simple things, nothing unfamiliar. When darkness fell, he closed the shed door partway, leaving enough of a gap for air and light, but not so much that the cold could cut straight through. That night, sleep did not come easily. Ethan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar chorus of nighttime sounds. The wind rose and fell. Branches scraped against the side of the house. Somewhere in the distance, something large moved through the forest, its steps too heavy to be any animal he knew. His muscles tensed automatically, his breathing growing shallow. The memory came without warning. Sand. Heat. The sharp crack of sound that split the air open. His chest tightened, his heart racing as if the present had slipped sideways and dropped him somewhere else entirely. He sat up abruptly, gasping, hands clenched hard enough that his nails bit into his palms. The sensation did not pass quickly. It never did. He swung his legs off the bed and stood, pacing the narrow room, grounding himself with touch and movement. The walls were solid, the floor steady beneath his feet. This was his house. This was Wyoming. He repeated the facts silently until his breath slowed enough to count. When he stepped outside, the cold struck him clean and sharp, cutting through the fog in his mind. He moved toward the shed without fully deciding to, drawn by something he could not quite name. Inside, the juvenile stirred as he entered. It did not rise. Instead, it shifted closer to the wall, watching him carefully. Ethan sat on the floor several feet away, back against the opposite wall, knees drawn up. He did not speak. He focused on his breathing, slow and even, letting the rhythm settle into his body. After a few minutes, the juvenile moved. It did not approach quickly or directly. It edged closer in small increments, pausing often, as if measuring the space between them. When it finally settled, it did so at an angle, not touching, but close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating faintly through the air. A low sound vibrated through the shed, not a vocalization so much as a deep, steady hum. Ethan felt it more than he heard it. The tension in his chest eased, just slightly. His breathing found a steadier rhythm, aligning unconsciously with the sound. The moment passed quietly, without ceremony. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him back to his feet. He left the shed and returned to the house, sleep following him more gently this time. Over the next several days, a fragile pattern formed. Ethan rose early and checked the perimeter, watching for signs of human activity. He noticed fresh tire tracks on the far access road, boot prints where none had been before. In town, the talk had shifted. There were rumors of illegal trapping, of something large spotted near the creek. Rangers had been seen driving the outer roads, scanning the forest with binoculars. Ethan listened without commenting. He paid for his supplies and left quickly, unease coiling tighter with every word. Back at the house, the juvenile grew stronger. Its movements became more confident, its steps steadier. It explored the shed cautiously, testing objects with careful hands, reacting sharply to any metallic sound. When Ethan dropped a wrench once, the creature froze instantly, body rigid, eyes wide, breath held. The reaction struck him hard, familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. He began to see himself reflected there. At night, when his memories pressed in, the juvenile seemed to sense the shift before Ethan fully did. It would approach and settle nearby, its presence grounding without demand. The low, vibrating sound returned during those moments, steady and calming. Ethan did not question it. He accepted it as it was. One evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Ethan noticed something new. Large footprints appeared at the edge of the clearing, half hidden beneath fallen leaves. They circled the area, but did not cross into the open space near the house. The impression was unmistakable, adult, powerful, observant. Ethan stood still, heart pounding, understanding settling heavily over him. The juvenile was not alone in this world. It never had been. He felt the weight of responsibility sharpen into something more precise. This could not continue indefinitely. The longer the creature remained here, the greater the risk. Humans were drawing closer. Curiosity would turn to pursuit soon enough. That night, as he sat in the shed, the juvenile rested nearby, its breathing calm, its posture relaxed in a way it had not been before. Ethan watched it in the dim light, memorizing details he did not yet know he would miss. This presence was temporary. He had known that from the beginning. The thought hurt more than he expected. When he finally returned to the house, he carried the weight of that knowledge with him, heavy and unavoidable. Outside, the forest remained quiet, but it was no longer empty. And Ethan understood that the moment of choosing what came next was approaching, whether he was ready or not. The valley changed without announcing itself. There was no clear line between one season and the next, only a gradual shift in light and sound and temperature that Ethan felt more than he saw. Mornings arrived with less edge to them, the frost thinner, the air softer against the skin. The creek ran a little fuller, its voice deeper, more assured. Somewhere high along the ridges, snow still clung stubbornly to the shadows. But down here, the land was loosening its grip on winter. Ethan noticed the changes because the juvenile did. In the early days, the creature had moved carefully, its steps tentative, its posture always angled toward escape. Now it stood taller, not grown, not suddenly strong, but steadier. It walked the length of the shed without hesitation, tested its weight against the wall, climbed part way up a support beam before dropping back down with a soft thud. Its breathing no longer rasped. The raw mark beneath the fur at its shoulder had faded from angry red to dull pink, healing cleanly. Ethan watched all of it with a quiet, tightening awareness. He had been measuring time without meaning to, counting progress in small, precise ways. The creature ate with ease now. It slept deeply, curled in on itself like a child who had learned, at least temporarily, that the ground beneath it would not vanish. The low, steady vibration it made at night came less often. When it did, it was softer, almost absent-minded, as if the need for it had diminished. Ethan felt the change in himself as well. The nights were still difficult, but the edges had dulled. When memories surfaced, they no longer swallowed him whole. He could feel the present beneath them, solid and persistent. He slept longer. He woke with less dread. His body no longer braced for impact at every unexpected sound. It frightened him a little, how quickly he had adapted to not being alone. The signs beyond the clearing grew clearer with each passing day. More tracks appeared along the forest edge, large and deliberate. They never crossed into the open space near the house, but their presence was undeniable. Ethan found markings on trees he had passed 100 times before, deep grooves cut into bark at a height no human hand could reach. He understood them instinctively. Boundaries, communication, waiting. The people, too, were closer now. He saw the glint of metal through the trees one afternoon while repairing a fence. Heard the distant buzz of a drone, thin and persistent, drifting across the valley before retreating. In town, the rumors had sharpened. No longer vague talk of strange signs, but excited speculation. Someone had found a trap torn apart. Someone else claimed to have footage, blurry and inconclusive, but enough to draw attention. Ethan did not linger in those conversations. He paid, nodded, left. That night, he sat in the shed longer than usual, the lantern casting soft light across the wooden walls. The juvenile sat nearby, watching him with calm curiosity. Its eyes were clear now, alert, but no longer clouded with fear. When it moved closer, it did so without hesitation, settling within arm's reach. Ethan did not touch it. He did not need to. "I know," he said quietly, the words barely more than breath. He was not sure who he was speaking to. The creature? Himself? The valley? The juvenile tilted its head, listening to the sound rather than the meaning. Sleep came easily that night, but it was shallow, filled with half-formed dreams. When Ethan woke before dawn, the decision had already been made. It sat in his chest with a strange mix of relief and grief, heavy but unavoidable. The morning was pale and still. A thin mist clung to the low ground, blurring the edges of trees and hills until the world felt smaller, closer. Ethan moved through his routine with care, packing only what he needed. He left the house as he always did, locking the door behind him out of habit, though he knew he would return soon enough. At the shed, the juvenile rose as he entered. It watched him closely, sensing the shift in energy, if not the reason. Ethan gestured gently toward the forest, then turned and began to walk. The creature followed. They moved slowly at first, the path winding through familiar ground, before narrowing into something less defined. Ethan did not look back often. He did not want to rush the moment, or prolong it unnecessarily. The forest thickened around them, the trees closer together, the air cooler and damp with the smell of moss and soil. As they walked, memories surfaced unbidden, not of war this time, but of coming home, of standing on a different edge of a different place, uncertain where he belonged, of realizing that survival and belonging were not the same thing. They reached the boundary where the land changed, where the open valley gave way fully to forest, dense and layered. Sound swallowed almost immediately. Ethan stopped. The juvenile halted beside him. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature shifted its weight, glancing between Ethan and the darkened spaces ahead. Its body language was cautious, conflicted. Ethan remained still, hands at his sides, his posture open but resolute. He would not lead it farther. He would not follow it back. This choice had to be its own. The juvenile took a step forward, then another, then stopped again. It turned its head, looking at Ethan with an expression that was neither fear nor dependence, but something quieter. Recognition, perhaps, or simply awareness. Ethan felt the ache rise then, sharp and sudden. He swallowed it down, steadying his breath. He had carried this creature out of danger, had given it shelter, time, space to heal. That was the extent of his role. Anything more would be theft. The juvenile moved. It did not run. It walked, deliberate and calm, slipping between the trees with a grace that came naturally now. Its dark form blended quickly into shadow and foliage, becoming harder to track with each step. Within seconds, it was gone. The forest responded. Low sounds rolled through the trees, deep and resonant, felt more than heard. The ground seemed to vibrate faintly beneath Ethan's boots. Shapes shifted at the edges of his vision, massive and controlled. He did not see them clearly, and he did not need to. Their presence pressed against the space around him, not threatening, not welcoming, simply acknowledging. Then, as quietly as it had begun, it ended. The forest settled. The sounds faded. The mist thinned. Ethan stood alone at the boundary, the weight in his chest slowly easing into something softer, less sharp. He turned back toward the valley. The walk home felt longer than it had before, though the distance was unchanged. The land looked the same, but it no longer felt empty. The creek greeted him with its familiar whisper, steady and unconcerned. The house stood where it always had, unchanged and waiting. Inside, the quiet was different. It did not press in on him. It did not echo. Ethan moved through the rooms, aware of the absence without being consumed by it. He sat at the table and drank his coffee slowly, watching the light shift across the floor. The routines were still there, intact and familiar, but they no longer felt like barriers against collapse. They felt like choices. Later that afternoon, he walked the land again. He followed the creek, checked the fences, paused at the place beneath the tree where everything had begun. The rope was gone, the ground settling back into itself, the story already being absorbed by time and weather. Ethan stood there for a long while, breathing evenly, feeling the solid weight of the present beneath his feet. He understood now that not all connections were meant to last. Some arrived only to remind you that you were still capable of caring, still capable of acting, still alive beneath the layers of survival you had built. As the sun lowered behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the valley, Ethan turned toward home. He walked with a steadier stride than he had in years, his shoulders less hunched, his breath deep and unforced. The forest held its silence. The creek kept moving. And for the first time since returning to this place, Ethan felt not that his life had resumed, but that it had quietly, firmly continued. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are coming next, and you can find other videos on the channel right now. Share this video with someone who might want to watch it, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from.